My name is James Dailey, and this is Ed Cable, and we are going to take you on a quick tour of the Mifos and Finark ecosystem. We've been working in the area of financial systems and building a core banking platform over the past 17 years. Open APIs, open source banking. So we're gonna zero in on the last few years, but we do want to sort of start with the history, a quick overview.
Yeah, so across the past couple years, we've started to see some success in selling the idea of open source for banking to the enterprise. And so we think we've learned some powerful lessons and interesting stories along the way. We want to share those with you today. And so throughout these journeys of adopting open source, we've been able to convert skeptics and see champions emerge. So we're looking forward to sharing those stories. So Mifos is largely about financial inclusion, or delivering and providing access to affordable and responsible financial services for the 3 billion underbanked across the world. So the financial services that you and me and James, we take for granted, like a secure place to save your money, being able to pay for your utility bills, or getting access to credit to take out a loan, or develop small assets, aren't available to more than 3 billion across the world. So we talk about solving poverty one line of code at a time, and the way we do that is through a global community and an ecosystem. And this global community has built, supported, and used solutions on top of both Apache Finark and Mifos. Across the world, we have more than 8 million customers that are being reached by 300 different financial institutions who build on top of our open APIs across 41 different countries.
So Finark is the code that the Mifos.org initiative developed as a community to serve small banks and credit unions and microfinance organizations around the world. And again, we started as in a concept back in 2002. And we are now an independent Apache project, or rather the code has been contributed to Finark. And we've done this because we see that what we've done for small banks and microfinance organizations is actually more broadly applicable to the world of financial services. And so with our new generation, and I'll shout out to Merle here, who's one of our lead architect on the Finark CN Cloud Native architecture, that with this, we can participate in and disrupt a 10 billion a year industry in financial services, fintech. And this will enable a commoditization of financial service software, but also provide financial services for everyone. Finark 1.0, so just to sort of orient you here, Finark 1.0 is actually our second generation. So that's the code that we contributed. Mifos was the first generation, and it's sort of one of those things that, you know, after you've built it, you realize you've made a bunch of mistakes and you don't ever want to talk about it. But it's still out there actually in production in a few places, still serving hundreds of thousands of people, and people are using it on a daily basis. So that was very monolithic code. The architecture was not componentized sufficiently, or decomponentized. So we deliberately in 2011, 2010, started a brand new project from the ground up. We had a very small team that built a kind of a headless approach. So it was all API driven. There was nothing on the front end. And we did that deliberately because we wanted the ecosystem to be able to adopt it and put a front end on it and make money on that. And then if they could do that, then they would want to be part of this community. So that was our first attempt to try to make that happen. And the other thing I would note there is that when we did that, we released an open API. It was a banking API. As far as we know, one of the first open banking APIs that had customers and know your customer APIs and transactions and payments and all of the things that you might see now in a banking API. So that was made possible a bunch of different white label solutions. Then we came to the need for a more constructed approach. And so,
Yeah, so as James noted, Finark CN or Finark Cloud Native, that is in fact our third generation architecture. And we believe it's completely unlike any other core banking system out there. It's cloud native, it's microservices based, and it provides the scalability, the flexibility, and the modularity that we saw was needed in the market. And we want to continue to emphasize that individuals and volunteers and partners across our community for more than the past decade, they've been building open source for banking. And so it's not just applications they're building, it's a platform we've built, and we're going to highlight the stories of innovation and adoption amongst the enterprise later in this presentation.
So how many of you have heard of PSD2? Show of hands. Okay, one person. So
Just one.
PSD2 is the Payment Systems Directive 2, the second one in Europe, that was released in order to try to have a convergence of systems in the European market so that banking systems could talk to each other. Payments could flow across borders more seamlessly, things like that. So it's driving a lot of innovation in Europe in terms of creating an open banking with a capital O and B, where apps can now consume a bunch of different banking services from a variety of different players. And that was what it was intended to do. We don't have the equivalent of that at a global scale. But I bring that up because this has become the rage. Like open APIs has become very popular. We've got announcements from lots of different companies saying that they're building, the definitive open API for banking, and we're creating the APIs that will connect your bank to other banks. And so there's a lot of stuff going on right now and headlines around open banking. But what they mean by that is really open APIs. And so what we want to do is make sure we're clear that what we're talking about is open source banking. We are saying from the ground up, the plumbing, the underlying models can be and should be open. So this is sort of our moonshot. This is us planting a flag on a big, audacious goal of can we commoditize the back end? Can we create something that will move companies to the adjacencies of providing better value? Can we avoid mega platforms by having software that can be run at a community bank or a bank at a financial institution at a local level? I mean, can we have a different vision for financial services in the world, not just in developing countries, but everywhere? And so this is the audacious goal that we have set ourselves, is to be the financial services back end for a variety of different things. And we know that people are becoming more comfortable with this idea. Closed systems and walled gardens and such, they're not a defense against what's coming in terms of open innovation and the required speed that you need to move.
So how are we going to make this journey to the moon? How are we going to achieve this massive goal of reaching 3 billion underbanked? We fundamentally believe that openness needs to underlie every aspect of our strategy. And open source banking isn't just about the technology itself. You need to have an open ecosystem that guides open source business models to both identify and create and scale new solutions. You need an open community that's open to participation from technologists and subject matter experts alike. You also need open collaboration so people can share knowledge and support each other. And then lastly, you need open standards to underpin guidelines to scale new innovations.
So now that you've got a little taste of what we mean by our open source banking and our approach, let's take a look a little bit at the stack itself. So in Finark 1.0, again, that's code that was originally developed by a community of developers. It was then transferred to Apache. It's now an Apache project, which means that it is individual contributors that are coming to that, not companies. And it is our generation 2, and it's open API driven, and it's a platform for financial inclusion. It's mature, it's stable, it's being used in production in hundreds of institutions, from the very small 5,000 customers to fairly large, a couple of million to even hundreds of millions of transactions a month. So it's multi-tenant. It is enabled, it can scale to a certain amount. And beyond that Finark backend, we also have things that still remain with the Mifos project, which are the front-end systems and a few other toolings around data migration. The front-end systems are Android reference apps and web reference apps so that people can visualize and understand what they could do. And those things are also released as open source, so they could actually take those and build their own things with those tools that we've helped birth there. So that creates a whole stack for the consumer, all the way to the consumer, which is fairly unique in open source movements to have something that goes all the way to the end user.
Okay, so what does open source banking from the ground up really look like? You know, this is the future, and we're starting to make it a reality. So as James talked about earlier, you know, others are working on open APIs, others are working on an open access to data layer, but we, and nobody else right now, is actually trying to make the complete core banking system open source. So we've architected Generation 3, or Finark CN, as completely cloud native and microservices based. So anybody can come and take these individual microservices and configure them to build whatever type of solution or application that they can imagine. So think of these as Lego blocks that you can configure and build into a different financial service application. And so just as James also noted, you know, we want to see the core banking system become a commoditized piece of software, and then the value lies in the data that's flowing in and out, as well as the applications and solutions that are being built on top of the API layer. So we believe that this approach is going to unlock new services for consumers. It's going to help level the playing field for fintech companies, and it'll also even help banks to be more responsive and nimble to attending to customer needs.
So that was the future, and that's where we're headed, and that's what we're building right now. This is where we are today, though, with a sample of the innovative companies, and there are many innovative companies out there that use our back end to go to market. They go to market rapidly. That's one of the key reasons they might use our software. Or they need it for a small innovation piece that they want to get started on a cheap basis. So our ecosystem has helped a lot of institutions move beyond brick and mortar models into things such as digital credit. And over $1 billion have flowed over our various platforms. I mean, we don't have an exact number because folks won't exactly share all of their proprietary financial information, but we know that at least $1 billion.
I have asked, though, James.
But we've asked, but it's okay. So we're going to talk about a few case studies now, just to sort of give it a flavor for how we approach inbound sales, if you will, how we move from a project to a product. So we'll talk about Minds.io in Nigeria, Erst Financial Services in Germany, Novopay in India, and Gentera in Mexico. And along the way, we'll talk a little bit about how we've helped convert skeptics into believers or skeptics into contributors. And it's really based on our ability to generate a value for these entities that we've been talking to.
So for each of
go ahead.
For each of these case studies, we're going to take a look at the regional or market context for why adoption of open source was necessary. Then we're going to take a closer look at the company itself and why they chose to adopt open source. And then we're going to look at the solution and some of the impact that was made. So I'm going to start out taking a look at Nigeria. So in Nigeria, there's a population of more than 100 million adults, and more than 70% of them are still underbanked. And while mobile money is available there are close to 24 different providers. It's massively fragmented, and there's not one market player that's dominant in providing valuable services. So I'm going to fast forward now to Silicon Valley, where the teams at Minds.io resides. And so this case study represents a great example of how both technology and a team from the Valley can be brought to bear to help solve a problem like financial access in West Africa. So Minds.io is made up of a team of 3 PhDs from Stanford University who have decades of experience in cloud computing, machine learning, and other disciplines. And so over the years at Stanford, they built and patented in-memory analytics engine that they wanted to take to market. So since two of the founders were Nigerians themselves, they thought and believed that a viable first commercial use case could be providing financial access to the underbanked throughout West Africa, and that's why they chose Nigeria as the initial market. So I just want to talk about a few of the factors of why they chose to develop on top of an open source platform for bringing to market their quick cash solution. So first and foremost, they already had their in-memory analytics engine that was capable of processing terabytes of data in mere seconds. So they needed to find a cost-effective core banking platform that could effectively match that same level of scale. And so they found and came across Mifos, and they built out their system on top of it. And by leveraging a core banking infrastructure that was already there, they were able to focus their energies and their efforts on building out innovative customer-facing apps for their clients, continuing to provide and refine the analytics in the engine itself, but also, and most critically, formulating the partnerships that were necessary in market with the local telco companies, as well as the local microfinance banks to make their model work out. And I just want to show a quick diagram of how their solution actually works and what it looks like from the perspective of the customer. So all a customer needs to do to apply for a loan is simply text *561# on their mobile device, or they can enter their phone number via a web app, and then their MTake in-memory analytics platform is going to instantly credit risk the borrower on thousands of data points that are available in their mobile network subscriber data. And then all that data flows into Mifos. They've made a credit decision, and then within Mifos, they leverage some of these core building blocks there to manage the customer account and maintain the life cycle of the loan. So Mifos is that one source of financial truth for the customer, and then the customer can do their repayments via these 4 channels here, and then disbursements also happen instantly via mobile money. So Minds.io, they've really been happy with the success they've been able to achieve. They were able to get to market rapidly, and they were also able to scale. They're now reaching more than 400,000 customers and opening 1,000 new loan accounts a day, and their goal is to move towards 10,000 loan accounts being open each day. And we're now just starting to get them to start contributing some of the core enhancements they made back to the community.
So in Mexico, we worked with Gentera. Gentera is the holding company for Comportamos, which means sharing, and it's the largest microfinance organization in Latin America with over 5 million customers. Mexico, for context, is 120 million people. 60% don't have a banking account. 90% of transactions in Mexico are done in cash, which at a global level, about 80% are done in cash. But in developed economies, such as the United States or Europe, the amount done in cash is much less, from maybe 30%. So there's a gap there. And then there's 6 million merchants in Mexico that don't accept electronic payments. So that's sort of the state of that. They're the clear market leader, Gentera is, for financial inclusion in Mexico. And apart from the bank, they have a correspondence network that includes 2,700 merchants. They have an insurance company with 5 million subscribers, and they have a remittance company doing 4.4 million transactions a month. So they really needed to innovate to remain competitive in their environment. They needed to move faster than they were able to. And just like a lot of other banks, they were facing the cost and the difficulty of innovating on top of their SAP system. I mean, in this case, it was SAP. I'm sure there's others to pick on, where the typical change took a year to implement. So as an aside, I wanted to mention that when I began the Mifos project back in 2002, 2003, I had a conversation with Comportamos, and they wanted some advice on what system to choose. I think I might have said, yeah, SAP sounds fine, because at that point, we were too early with Mifos, and they were in a hurry to get a real, existing big iron kind of banking system. And so one of the lessons for me is that, maybe if you can stick around in market long enough, that cycle comes around yet again, and you get another chance to pitch your case. So in any case, we met up with Eduardo, the director of innovation, of innovation platforms at Gentera, in 2016, and realized that he was really feeling the pain of having this SAP backend, and they were very interested in open source and what we were articulating. So this is how we met their challenge. First, we started small. We didn't try to replace SAP. That would have been just really impossible. But rather, we implemented Mifos and used an existing APIs that, on our side, to connect to their back-end systems with a kind of API mapper. Two, we focused on a complete digital strategy, something that was new, it was revolutionary, it added value, and it enabled a better user experience. It also enabled a revamp of processes, which was really important in what they were aiming for. We also measured the impact that was having on customer satisfaction, the time savings to the field staff, and the bottom line impacts of those changes. We also made sure that we could rapidly innovate. Ideas were developed and tested with people, and then those changes could be accelerated. Anyway, long story short, we were successful. And as of last month, over 50,000 of their 3 million customers are on the new software platform, and it is growing daily. They're using digital payments, so they're not using cash. They're using digital meeting rooms, WhatsApp, and it's sort of integrated into the experience. And so this saved the customer time and was safer for them. They're not going to meetings and spending a lot of time doing that. The staff was able to manage twice as many customers, and that's a big deal for this organization. And now no one who's on this new system wants to go back to the old way. So that's also significant and where the evolution is going on this.
Yeah, so let's cross the Atlantic and head on over to Germany. And Merle, correct me if I get any of this market context wrong. But despite the strength of Germany's economy, they weren't immune to the Great Recession. And one sector that really had the havoc wreaked on it by the financial crisis was the Landesbanken sector. So a number of those regional state-owned banks needed to be bailed out or even restructured in some cases. So one such bank was the former West LB Bank. And so they became EAA Bank. And their CEO was tasked with lowering the operational costs from 900 million to 700 million euros per year. And he had the visionary idea of potentially using open source platforms to achieve that goal. And so he reached out to some former friends and colleagues at DPC, which is an enterprise Java development shop in Hungary, to see if they knew of any open source loan management platforms that could help them, reduce the costs of their software licenses, because they were on a costly system called MySys 1IQ. And so it was actually an intern that discovered Mifos and Finark in a Google search. And then that solution was added to the list of solutions that DPC was evaluating. They did a closer review of the code, the architecture, and they were really pleased with what they saw because it also aligned with the tech stack that they were working on. They actually said it was a brilliant platform. And so they began their customizations, and they haven't had any regrets since in making that choice. And so in this case, although the leadership was really bought on to open source and the key champion there, it was actually the IT staff that were hesitant and needed to be shifted in their mindset. So they were used to the more traditional waterfall development approaches, and they had to be bought into a more agile fashion of development. But luckily the team at DPC was able to do that by delivering timely releases in a fast and efficient manner. And just quickly going to look at how they built their solution out for managing the loan portfolio. So DPC, they worked rather independently, but when they needed help, they reached out to me and others in the community. But they really modified the core loan module deep down in Mifos X and Finark. And then they also stripped down completely Mifos X itself and made it a separate payments microservice that they could integrate with the ISO 222 standards. And then lastly, this all tied in nicely with their existing CRM, reporting, and then ERP infrastructure they had in SAP. And they're only just starting to go live with the solution now, but they're looking forward to the benefits of lower costs by not being on a costly per tenant license model. They're also going to be able to free themselves from the complex and massive core banking system that they were using before. And then staff no longer will have to do costly and timely, error-prone manual intervention. And then finally, they're able to integrate with electronic payments like direct debit. And so most recently, we learned that Erste Financial Services has been acquired by IBM, and they're exploring potentially offering it as an outsourced management loan service to other banks in Germany. And both ourselves and DPC are eager to explore that with IBM, but also to help make the additional investment to getting the code back into the community. So if there's anybody in the room from IBM today, we'd love to further that conversation.
So recently, all eyes have been on India and its enormous innovation by the India Stack, which comprises of open APIs for presenceless, paperless, cashless, and tech layers that unlock the services to the last mile. This was made possible by biometrically verifying 1.2 billion people and by the design of the Aadhaar system, which is the unified ID system. And it's sort of the connective glue in between these different layers. So if you haven't read about Aadhaar, I'd recommend that. It's a fascinating thing and something to look at. Our story and involvement really started with Srikanth Nadhamuni, who's the CTO and designer of the Aadhaar system. And he came together with Vinod Khosla, I'm sure that's a name people know, to launch Khosla Labs in India. And the first startup included Novopay, which was part of a new set of payments banks in India. So with Aadhaar, Srikanth knew that they could go to the last mile in authenticating people in rural villages and remote places, establishing a trust, and including them financially. So with a mobile device and a fingerprint scanner, biometric, the retail outlet anywhere could be transformed into a kind of bank branch. Starting with 15 outlets in Bangalore, Novopay was born. Novopay knew that to be a leader in an ever-growing mobile wallet market, they had to scale and innovate fast, and they couldn't only do that through a flexible technology. So the Novopay journey began all the way back in October 2013 in a Cafe Coffee Day, if you guys know that, on MG Road in Bangalore, that's the spot, where Nayan Ambali, who's the co-founder of Mifos, gold partner, Conflux Technologies, he overheard a bunch of people talking, some young professionals talking about microfinance. So he's the kind of guy that just couldn't resist, so he stood up and he walked over and he pitched himself into the conversation and introduced Mifos concept and Finark and Conflux and their role in that market. Eventually, one of those people introduced him to Srikanth, the Khosla Labs chair. So selling Srikanth then became the key thing, but he was already sold on open source because he'd been a supporter and advocate of it and involved in e-governance in India for a while. So he was, I heard Denise Cooper's talk yesterday, I think he's one of those open source heroes. So Mifos and Novopay were also greatly aligned on the vision for financial inclusion and the transformation of payments and mobile-based banking platforms. So it was also greatly aligned there. Mifos was available, it was proven, and it had been tested out in the field. Although it wasn't designed really for this particular payments use case, it had the core capabilities necessary for product definition, wallet accounting, and all, the things that were needed. So freed up, what this led them to do is being freed up to not to have to buy or build their own core banking system, they've been able to get to market faster, focus on differentiation, and really working on the customer experience. Mifos provided sort of the back-end worry-free accounting. Today, with over 50,000 agents across 20 states offering remittances, domestic money transfers, account opening, bill payment, cash management, et cetera, Novopay is actually the market leader. And they have this really unique thing called the Novopay War Room. So they can trace every transaction in real time and manage it with a team of 15, which really relates to their mission of bringing banking services to billions using hundreds of people. They've now reached tremendous impact, and we've also been working on the knowledge transfer. That it wasn't always an easy road for us. The main difficulty points were that the banks were skeptical that anything free could be of value, and so that took some time to figure out. The journey with them is still really ongoing because they are users of the software, but they aren't yet contributors. And so we are working on that. But again, they've done, basically on an annualized basis, they're at $1 billion a year in transactions. Mm-hmm. So we're going to wrap this up with some do's and don'ts to try to stay on time. So when you're trying to achieve something with these institutions, do talk about how open source can foster a culture of maintainable code.
And don't force your customer to have to go at it on their own in the community. If they come to you on the mailing list, be welcoming and engaging and answer their questions. And so do also evangelize your project wherever and whenever you can. As you saw, our leads came from coffee shops, conferences, all the way down to Google searches.
Don't confuse open source with free, although it is an important value to some, that the low cost. It's still important that they understand that it's not just free stuff. Also explain how it really lowers the cost to their business. I mean, this is the point about commoditization, and that's an important sales point.
Yeah, and don't let your architecture get stagnant. Although we were working on our Gen 3 microservices architecture, we only after the fact learned that a number of these partners were already in-house developing their own microservices-based approaches.
Do engineer for scalability and extensibility. I think it's sometimes an afterthought that people will solve that problem later. I think it's really important that we think about that up front. Also, don't encourage free rider thinking. Instead, have some really clear understandings about inbound contributions and improvements so you can keep this thing going.
Yeah, and so don't try and go at it alone. You do need to have more than one company that's ready to stand behind your solution. So we worked with partners, volunteers, and consultants around the globe to deliver on these projects.
Don't waste time if a conversation seems to be sort of dragging. Move on to the next thing. I think sometimes deals get stuck and you invest way too much time in something that can't go.
Yeah, and then lastly, do integrate the user into the community early on so they can see the value of being part of there so they can become a contributor later on.
So, our vision I've articulated, and if you think about it, it's a phone, it's an account, it's access to financial services. It can be powered by open source, cloud native, with open APIs.
Yeah, and so there's many ways you can get involved. We want you to take action. Like as you see, we have a massive social mission we're trying to achieve, but there are also other applicabilities of the platform itself. So we're looking for contributors that want to build on top of the code and extend the framework. We're looking for companies or individuals that want to build on top of the platform and have their own solutions they'd like to see in our ecosystem. And lastly, we just need supporters, whether that be followers on social media, donors to the cause, or even advisors to help us with governance and the growth of our community. So we've got, the next 7 minutes for questions and answers, and happy to cover any topics you'd like to explore.
Thank you. Sure.
I'm pretty sure I had lunch last week with Shrikant.
Okay.
A small world, so.
Yeah, he's at the World Bank now? Is that the guy?
No, he should still be, he's still CTO as far as we know still. Okay, the question was, this woman, she had lunch with Shrikant last.
I'm pretty sure it's the same guy.
Okay.
He's one of the Admire artists.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
He wears different hats, so I'm sure he might, multiple roles.
Exactly. Yeah, no, I was at 2 Admire events last week, one in Bangalore and one in Hyderabad. And so, other than that Novopay solution, what do you use for identity in the other use cases that you had, like particularly the Nigeria? Well, I have another question about the Nigeria one, but.
Very good.
Yeah, let me. So the question was, what do we use for identity solutions in India and other places? But India, we're clear that that's Aadhaar and that's clear. So I actually do a lot of work in this space, and identity is a very big problem, and there are lots of other efforts out there working on it. I learned this week about Indy, Hyperledger Indy blockchain solution, but there are lots of other efforts. What we do on the platform is that there's flexibility in terms of the fields that are available for identifying a customer. name, address, location, and that can be extended. And so it's different from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. So we are very open to having a good collaboration with other efforts and having that integrated into and there's a lot of other technologies that we could talk about, but.
But my question about currently, the current use cases you're using, the bank does the KYC, not, you don't provide that on the platform.
Well, the platform, so the question is how do we relate to the KYC and how that's supported on the platform. Currently, the platform supports KYC processes. So like every core banking system out there, there is a process whereby you enter in customer data, you get documents, you validate that that person is who they say they are. The system currently has some of that, and it depends on where it's been implemented to see, we could have a detailed conversation about it, but it's,
You don't do your own e-KYC.
The system can support any e-KYC that's available in market.
Yeah, and to add to that, as James said, they can add the additional fields, upload whatever documents, and we've tried to design the architecture in mind with like principles from the Level 1 project at the Gates Foundation around enabling tiered KYC. So based on the level of information and identity that's stored in the system, you can do certain levels of transactions. So.
Okay, and then one other, not an identity-related question, but on the Nigerian, the quick cash.
Mm-hmm.
What do you do? What is the module that does sort of the credit checking? You said it came from a bunch of sources. What is that?
Yeah, so just, I think we want to make this point very clear. The Finark project is the project that provides the core software for managing accounts, consumers, transactions, payments, all of that, right? And we hope for and we want people to take that and use it for their for-profit models. In Nigeria, Minds.io has built a credit scoring module, and they make their money on the fact that they've built a really cool credit scoring algorithm. And that connects, they're using our thing to get to market rapidly. Yeah.
And then one other question on your, sorry.
There's other questions.
I'm sorry, I just want to know on your diagrams, there's pink and there's green. You guys provide the green and the pink is what the other core banking.
So like the grayed out, so the grayed out areas, those were just to emphasize that within Mifos and the core banking system, there are many different business layers or modules. And so the green ones were the components that they use specifically for their solution. And as we're migrating to the new microservices-based architecture, you can more easily pick and choose which components you need. So that was what that was demonstrating. Mm-hmm.
I think we have a few more minutes if there's other questions.
Yeah, 2 more minutes.
All right. Well, if no other questions, thank you for coming. And
yeah, and we'll be at our booth till the end of the OSCON show. So if you have any other questions or topics you'd want to explore, please stop by there. So.
Thank you.